We are very excited to continue our conversation on safety, preventable issues as Klal Yisroel begins yet Baruch Hashem, another new summer. We have some of the great Hatzalah members, experts, professionals who've been out on the front lines of community safety for many, many years. It's a pleasure to welcome Rav Motty Waisbrod to our program. He is a Borough Park Hatzalah member for many, many years. Today, he's one of the captains in Hatzalah Central Jersey. Really, it's an honor to have him, a seasoned Hatzalah member, paramedic, who also happens to have a house in Woodridge, where I also spend my summers for many, many years. So, Motty, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Motty, we're talking about safety, preventable issues, things that are really at the forefront of making sure that our growing Klal Yisroel has the ability to have a wonderful summer, a healthy summer, and also a safe summer. So from my perspective, I have certain things that I've seen over the years. I'm sure you have as well. We've been together on many accident scenes and other Hatzalah calls where people are calling, Rahman al-Islam, people get sick, people fall. That happens. That is not always as preventable as some of the things that we're talking about today. We're talking about safety. So when we talk about safety, let's go straight into it. For me personally, one of the great things of the summer, one of the great attractions of a bungalow colony, of a camp, of coming upstate in the summertime where the air is crisp and clean, the sun is shining, you spent a whole year cramped up, kids were in school, adults were all working hard. Pools. Pool safety, by me, is one of the most important things that is sometimes overlooked by people. And I think that we have so many ways that we can be safe. So from my perspective, and I want to hear from you, from where I come from, I cannot imagine any scenario where I would allow young children to go to a pool that does not have a lifeguard. What's your thoughts on that?
So obviously, of course, pool safety is a number one issue. And I don't know if it's a number one issue. They're all number one issues. Anything that's preventable is a number one issue for the summer. But definitely things that we find more often. Most children are not used to being around pools and around bodies of water at all. It doesn't only necessarily have to be pools. We have a lot of incidents with lakes that are inside of bungalow colonies that people allow their children to go fishing by, and they don't think that it's a danger. Well, a small child, depending on the size of the child and depending on the overall age of the child, a small child can fall into a lake that doesn't look to be very deep and find himself in a situation where he can't crawl out of it and he can drown in the lake. So although we think of pools, there are other bodies of water that we need to be careful with. As far as not allowing children to go into a pool without a lifeguard, that's the obvious part. The not so obvious part is when your child comes to you and tells you, well, I want to go night swim, and one of the fathers or one of the mothers or whatever the case may be offered to watch us. Well, that's great for the parent that offered to watch you, but if they're not trained as a lifeguard, if Chas v'shalom there is an accident at the pool, first of all, they won't be trained in how to get you out as fast as possible. And if Chas v'shalom it goes even worse and the patient becomes unresponsive, or actually becomes a patient, becomes unresponsive, or goes into cardiac arrest, they won't be trained in most cases in how to start the first life-saving support that they have to provide for the patient. So it's great that they're offering to watch you, but watch you means that they're trying to prevent you from getting into an accident. But if Chas v'shalom the child does get into an accident, they're not going to be much of help. So I think that's something that people forget about.
Very, very true. Again, we've seen horror stories and we've listened to and watched over many, many years. Preventable accidents, pool safety, not just in the pool, but around the pool. I talk about this all the time. I've seen it in my own bungalow colony where the door gets broken or it's unlocked, it's left unlocked. And we have kids who are just wandering into pools or figure out a way, even not the traditional way of getting into the pool. Yeah, that front door is locked, but there's a cracked board on the back or a way that they can get into the pool, and they go and they get into the pool area. What a potential sakana that might be.
I think that, besides the pools, obviously, pool safety is extremely important, having it locked with a lock that the children don't actually know the number. You'd be surprised how many children know the numbers to the combination locks that we think are locked. They're way more resourceful than we are. and they figure out a way in. But another thing that is become more commonplace in certain bungalow colonies these days, well, not Chas v'Shalom, not calling them bungalow colonies, but developments where there are expensive homes. There's usually a very large shul, and that large shul has a mikveh. And the mikveh is not necessarily as protected as a pool may be. And the children during the summer are very bored, and they walk around. Then I shouldn't say they're bored, but they find things to occupy their time with. And they get together with other children.
Looking for ways to entertain themselves.
Right, and they get together with other children, and they find their ways into shuls, and then they find their ways into a mikveh, and it's equally dangerous. A mikveh is equally dangerous as a pool is, if not more so.
So we came up with a couple of things outside of the obvious sakana and potential danger of a pool. Bodies of water by lakes, which must be guarded, must be watched. And this responsibility, all of the things we just discussed, all comes back to one source. It comes back to the responsibility of parents to know and make sure that their children are A, in the right place, B, that the country living that they're in have all of these safeguards. I discussed this with many, many Askanim who are spread throughout the Catskills. Whose responsibility really is it? There's a manager, there's a caretaker. Yes, all of those issues really are on the management company or on the caretaker. But ultimately, it really falls upon the parents. The responsibility of making sure that your development, your camp, your whatever, really falls on the parents to make sure that their children are in a place that is safe.
So I agree with that, but I would add also that a lot of parents are also on vacation. And they're in surroundings that they're not accustomed to. They're not there the whole year. Sometimes a lot of the accidents that we see happen in the first few weeks or the first few days, actually, of people coming up to the country, where number one, camps haven't started yet, day camps haven't started yet, the children are wandering around. Before the preseason. And the children are wandering around, the parents haven't, gotten their bearings yet, and they're not fully aware as to what's going on. And when you say it's the ultimate responsibility of the parents, I agree, but not necessarily the parents of that child. We are all parents. And if we see something, we should be saying something. Very and if good. We see that a child is doing something that's unsafe, or children are doing something that's unsafe, and we don't want to be that parent to go and tell on them to the parents, well, you're doing a huge disservice and potentially, I wouldn't want to say causing the loss of life, but you're taking away the prevention of a possible cause of life by sticking it to yourself and not going and telling somebody something.
So I wrote about this actually about Pesach vacation. I have written about this and it's publicized, and we have thousands of families that go away for Yontif, and many of them go to Orlando, and they find themselves in one of these private homes that has a pool in the backyard. And before anybody can even think about what's going on, the kids are already undressed and they're in their bathing suit and they're already jumping into the pool. And there's chaos going on in the house, and the mother is unpacking the boxes, and the father is looking for this, and everybody is completely distracted. And I say, this is the moment where you have to take a very, very strong look at your surroundings and make sure that you are protecting your family. And I say now, you just made me think about this. People who are coming upstate, those first few days of coming upstate where there's such excitement in the air, people are so thrilled to get upstate. They got out of the city. It was a long summer. It was a long winter. It was cold. They're finally free. Everybody's out. The kids are out of camp, out of yeshiva. This, and like you just said, maybe even a little bit preseason. The lifeguard's not set up. The schedule's not right. The pool doesn't have the lock. Could be a number of variables, a number of things that are happening at the same time. This is the perfect storm for chas v'chalila, a catastrophe. Your point is so spot on.
I would add that I totally agree with that, and I would add that I think that any child that wants to go swimming, they're going to put up the biggest fuss if you make them put on a life jacket. But they do make life jackets for pools. And I think that as a parent, you need to fight that fuss and force your child to wear the life jacket. I'm not talking about the older children that know how to swim, but especially the younger children that like to waddle in the pool, that don't know how to swim yet. They should be in life jackets, because anything short of that is not really going to save them from drowning.
Right. I want to move away from water safety, which is, of course, a very important thing. I want to talk about pedestrian safety, because you live in Lakewood, and I know that there are a lot of places in Lakewood and certainly in Woodridge and other places in the Catskills, people walking on the 42, people walking, on Brickman Road where there are no sidewalks. And we're city people. And we're coming to an area that we're very accustomed to walking on sidewalks, and it's a little bit more organized. There's traffic lights. People who are coming from a city dwelling to a much more rural situation, I don't think we fully understand, especially a lot of people in our community don't drive. A lot of people don't drive, men and women. Believe it or not, it's true. And so they don't really have a perspective of what the driver oftentimes sees on the road. Daytime for sure, nighttime absolutely. I think that is an important nekuda to review and to tell Klal Yisrael the critical importance of making sure when you're walking on the side of the road, at night for sure, but even during the daytime, that you're wearing something that the drivers could see you, something reflective, something that you're making sure that you're wearing maybe a flashlight. Go ahead, Motty.
So we would hope that would be obvious for most people, but like like you say, a lot of people come from city areas that are not accustomed to dark roads. But I have some news for those people that are coming to these roads. Wearing a reflector alone is not always going to save you from chas v'shalom an accident. A lot of these roads have very, very, very thin shoulders, and you think you're walking on the shoulder and you're safe. Well, the cars traveling next to you, either parallel to you or perpendicular to you, are driving at speeds that are 60, 70 miles an hour. As much as we think that we would like that it shouldn't happen, people are on their phones. And looking down for a split second at the phone can cause the car to go into the area that you think is protected, the shoulder of the road. Nothing would happen to the car if they go into the shoulder for a minute. But if you happen to be walking there and happen to be standing there, even if you're wearing all the reflectors in the world, just the mere case that you're close to the road of high-speed vehicles transversing up and down the road puts you at tremendous risk for chas v'shalom being hit. And another thing that I might add, a lot of the times we gauge the distance that we are from cars. And sometimes that's correct, but especially upstate, a lot of the cars that are traveling on these roads have huge mirrors. The mirrors extend way past the width of the vehicle so that they should be able to see either trailers that they're carrying behind them or whatever the case may be. We've had cases where someone was safely on we'll call it safely on the shoulder of the road and was hit
by a mirror.
Right. And when a mirror is hitting somebody going
fast.
60, 70 miles an hour, that's a
real
bad injury.
Right. So we again, you and I have been driving upstate for many, many years. One of the hardest things for a driver, people, if you picture the scene, when you're driving at night and the oncoming car or the oncoming vehicle on the opposite lane that you're driving has their brights on, and all of a sudden they blind you and you can't see. So what do? You automatically look away to the other side. And before you even know what's going on, your car is veering away from that light. And like you just said, there's a very thin line where a pedestrian who's walking innocently, and like you said, even with reflective, but they're on a very thin median on the other side of the yellow line over there, if there isn't even a yellow line. So I think that pedestrians have to take into consideration, they need to be aware where they're walking, they need to know exactly what's coming, cars that are coming, and they have a responsibility for their own personal safety to make sure if you are walking, you are being careful. I know in the country, we've seen it, and certainly in Woodridge, many people hitchhike. That's just how it goes. Whether we like it or not, people are constantly looking for rides. They're standing over there on the side of the road in the worst possible place. The cars are hopefully stopping for them. They're causing who knows what's going on. I mean, we really have to stop for a moment and recognize this is not a city situation. This is a country dwelling. We got to be really careful of how we're driving up there.
And you brought up the hitchhiking thing, and I think that's something that is a tremendous problem because we have people hitchhiking in the middle of the road. Like imagine the middle of 42, they're not by an intersection, middle of 42, they're hitchhiking. And some good person is going to pull over for them. Now, the person pulling over doesn't have experience driving in the Catskills,
right.
Doesn't have experience driving in these kind of roads, and doesn't know that the person following him
He's driving
is
fast.
driving 60, 70 miles
All of
an
a
hour.
sudden you're
and all of a sudden
pulling
you're pulling over into a shoulder that's non-existent, and you're sticking out halfway. Now the other person has to veer to the other side, and there's oncoming traffic from the other side. So just by merely doing that favor of pulling over and giving someone a ride, you're putting so many people's lives at risk and at danger.
Including your own.
Including your own. And I will also add that not only walking or hitchhiking is dangerous. You'll often see in the Catskills, you have people biking. We get this urge to exercise when we come upstate. We think we're going to lose all the weight and we're going to become fit in 2 months. Never happens.
Motty, you look pretty good. You look pretty good.
It never happens. But you have all these people all of a sudden biking on these roads. And when you're biking, you hit a pebble. You could be the best biker in the world. Let's say you're an Olympic biker, whatever that may be called. But you hit a pebble, and that pebble turns your wheel a little bit. You have so little leeway if there happens to be a car going 60, 70 miles an hour right next to you. Right. And it's just simply dangerous.
You have the ditches on the side of the road.
Yeah.
I did bike v'chai for a long time. Believe me, I know about those pebbles, and then you have a small little rubber. So we have so many different responsibilities: vehicle responsibility, driver responsibility, pedestrian responsibility. All goes back to the same thing: safety, safety, safety. If everything that people do would just stop and for a moment recognize the potential for danger and take upon themselves the safety aspect, I think there's so many things that we could prevent, so many Hatzalah calls that we could prevent. We have been on calls, and we hear the calls on the radio. The public doesn't recognize or realize that a car accident in the Catskills, as an example, could oftentimes be so much more severe than a smaller car accident in the city. No car accident is geschmack. Nobody wants to have an accident. But a car that's going 10 or 15 miles an hour, because you really can't go much faster sometimes in the city, versus a car that's going down the 52 at 60, 70, 80 miles an hour, which oftentimes happens. We just really need to slow down and recognize the potential dangers.
So I actually moved to Lakewood only like 3 years ago. This summer will be 3 years. And in that time, I've been in Hatzalah for 2.5 years there. And in that time, I've responded to a multitude of different motor vehicle accidents, I should say. And during that time, you see that the speed and velocity, that the injuries that come out of that speed and velocity is not something I've ever seen or been accustomed to. Right. And the injuries are just mind-numbing, literally mind-numbing to see these injuries from the speed. And I think that the overall, if I would say one thing to all the parents coming upstate, is get familiar with your surroundings. A lot of these accidents happen because we're not familiar with our surroundings, whether it's pool safety, vehicle safety, bike safety, scooter safety. And I think that one thing that's constantly overlooked is burn safety. We have a lot of terrible burns during the Catskills, and the reason for it is because
talk a little bit more about that.
You're coming from kitchens that are large kitchens that you're used to in the city. You have all the comforts and conveniences of home, and usually you have these larger families that are trying to squeeze into smaller houses. Even the bigger houses are smaller than what most people are used to in the city. And you have a smaller kitchen, and you're putting the hot water tank in the chaynik for Shabbos. You're putting it in places that you're not used to putting it. And all you need is for a child to just go pull it on themselves, and now you have a catastrophic burn. Right. We see that time and time and time again, whether it's from burns from hot water, burns from cooking, or even burns from plain fires. People make campfires. They're throwing lighter fluid into the campfire, and before they know it, the fire jumps back at the person, and now his clothing caught fire. These are all things that you're not exposed to in the city. And if you would think about these things in advance and think of all the potential pitfalls and all the potential dangers that can arise, I think people would be more careful as to what they do. And I think that this awareness is great, and I think that it goes a long way to raise that awareness. Safety.
I'll give you 2 more examples of not knowing your surroundings. People are going to smaller bungalows. Maybe it's not their bungalow. Last year they were in a different bungalow. So I would just say 2 other things that, again, over the years of experience, covering outlets. We have in all the homes. We know we don't want the little kids to stick things into outlets because they get electrical burns. Just another way that a kid could hurt themselves. And you go to a bungalow colony, or you go to you rent something, or you're a counselor somewhere, and these electric outlets don't have the covers that you can get for 30 cents in Walmart. Covering your outlets is one of the things that parents should be doing, number one. And number two, another thought that I had was the shades that come with the long strings, which becomes a choking hazard, which becomes something chas v'chalila. Young children put the rope around their neck. Again, certain things that we can prevent by just knowing our surroundings and making sure that we're putting our children and our families in the best possible position to be safe.
I'll add one more thing to that list, which is smoke alarms and carbon monoxide
Absolutely.
alarms. These bungalows, chas v'shalom, if there's a fire,
They go up in
a second, and having a smoke alarm or a carbon monoxide alarm could literally save lives.
Okay, amazing. I just want to talk about one more thing. I think these are all important. I keep saying it over and over again because the theme of our program is safety, preventable things that we can do to keep ourselves safe. We're talking with our Motty Waisbrod, who is a longtime Hatzalah member, both in Borough Park and in Lakewood, a captain of Lakewood, a paramedic, someone who has real-world, real-time experience responding to calls both in the city and in the Catskills. I'm talking about one more important preventable item, which you alluded to earlier, talking about being safe and trying to be healthy. People are biking. I want helmets. The importance of wearing a helmet. How important is that?
I would tell you the answer to that by a call that we recently had, without giving too much information, where the child wearing a helmet on a scooter made the difference between a potentially loss of life and a broken leg. And this child was unresponsive, was ventilated due to the injury that he sustained to his head, but he sustained that injury wearing a helmet. So he had a terrible concussion.
Some protection.
He had a terrible concussion, and that caused him to get disoriented and to have to be intubated and sedated and all that. But the end result was 2 days later, he was awake, talking, fully recognizing everything around him and everyone around him. And his entire injury was an injury to his legs. Not an injury anybody wants. But if chas v'shalom had he not been wearing a helmet, the injury to the leg would have been completely insignificant because the injuries to his head would have been so dramatic.
So I'm going to say something dramatic. I don't think it's controversial. I think it's pretty simple. I think every parent that's going to go upstate for the summer and go upstate to the Catskills, they're going to bring up a couple of essentials. They're going to make sure that they have their clothing. They're going to make sure that they have their talis and tefillin. They're going to make sure that the kids have their bikes. They're going to make sure that the kids have their scooters. We know all of this already. I think equally as important is to make sure that your children have the helmets. And if you're coming upstate without a helmet, you need to get to whatever store sells helmets. We have plenty of Heimischer stores that sells helmets. We have Walmart that sells helmets. I think it needs to become 100% part of everything that we do. There can be and should not be any child that's driving a bike or riding a scooter in the Catskills on these roads, and even an adult that's biking on the side of the road, that's biking anywhere. We see in Hatzalah the difference, as Mati just said, the difference between life and death, between a serious injury and maybe a little bit of a less injury, when the helmet is employed, where helmets are being used. Parents have a responsibility, an achrayus, an obligation to make sure that their children have helmets.
Yeah. So to parents, I would say that I would never be so bold and have the chutzpah in telling you how to be mechanech your children. I don't have a background in chinuch, and I don't have experience outside of my own children. But I think that I would say something that would not be very popular in 2025. When it comes to safety, learn to tell your children no. If they don't have a helmet, no, they can't go bike riding. If they don't have a helmet, no, they can't get on a scooter. No, they can't get rides with underage drivers. No, they can't hitchhike on the side of the road. If you learn how to say no, that simple 2-letter word would save so much aggravation and tzaros that it's immeasurable and literally unspeakable.
We thank you very much for your time, Ramatal. We thank you so much for the service that you provide to Klal Yisrael, your experience. Safety, safety, safety is in the hands of everyone.
Thank you, Chaskel.